All right. Hey, what's up, everybody listening? Welcome to our evening YouTube discussion with the very great and lame David Wood. I told him in a previous text, we've got two mental patients that are coming on together to discuss. So hopefully you will be benefited. No, but I'm so stoked to have David on. And thankfully, David has invited all his followers. And I know that he's just built up a wonderful following. And all of you from Acts 17 Apologetics, thank you for cruising on over. David and I will probably roast each other a lot on this program, but it's part of the fun, right?
And your lame fans, right? Like the people who follow me are generally winners, right? If you follow a channel like the 1 Minute Apologist, right?
Yes, but keep in mind, as David says this, he's at the 1 Minute Apologist right now. So, hey, listen,
that's true,
David. If you're being feeling effeminate with the background that I have here, I'm at my mom's house, and so I feel the same thing.
Oh, I just thought you liked, flowers and stuff. They made you happy or something. I don't know.
Yes, I love carrying daisies and that kind of a thing.
I killed him.
It's we're on a new program here, and I don't know if we've got any questions coming up. Can you finish up, David?
Well, yeah, over in the chat, yeah, people were complaining. Now check this out. People were complaining. Check this out.
Okay. Let's learn.
Eternal Vigilance said it's unusual for David to be late. Live presentations are cursed with technical difficulties, though. I bet they will be on shortly. Notice that, right? Like it's my fault on your channel.
Yes. Okay. So I appreciate that observation, and I would say, have mercy on us. We're new at this stuff, and hey, tell us a little bit about what we're doing, David, and Kiowa next week. I've had some people asking me about it. It's crazy how many people are showing up. Mm-hmm. And I have been sharing, David's kind of the brain behind this. It happened when we were up in New York. And tell the audience a little bit about what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, well, when I suggested, I was thinking it would be like 6 or 7 people, and we got like what? Got that place full.
Yeah.
We got a place full. We're be people like all over the floor and stuff like that. Anyway, yeah. So we were hanging out, and it was me and Bobby and Jorge, and Bobby was looking all miserable, like I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna start drinking again. And so I was like, I got to do something to cheer this dude up. So I said, hey man, why don't we all get together? All the bigger Christian YouTube channels. We'll get together. We'll go through all the best tutorials on YouTube. We'll figure out the different strategies that'll work on our various channels. We'll implement all of the latest strategies that we can think of. And by the way, if people don't know what we're talking about, like strategies, right? Like we all try to make great content, right? There are all kinds of things that you can do, right? If you don't know how to title things the best way, or what you should put in a thumbnail, or how to do your description, or how to do keywords, or how to even arrange your content. There's all kinds of things you can do, everyone who's watching, to arrange your content in a way that makes it more likely that people are going to click on it, right? Like if you're making a bunch of points and you just put the topic, some people are going to click on it. If you happen to realize that you can arrange that material into a top 10 list, and then you put top 10 reasons, blah, 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 it just, for some reason, it creates an urge in the brain to click on it, because people have to know what, reason number 1 and so on is. So anyways, basically, there are all kinds of things like that. So we wanted to get together, go through everything we could think of what, would help our various channels, implement all those strategies for about a year, see how they affect what we're doing, then figure out all the stuff that works best for Christian apologists on YouTube, and then sort of put out our own set of tutorials, probably this time next year or something like that, for Christians who want to go on YouTube. Because I don't know about you, Bobby, but wherever I go, every church I go to, there are young people afterwards who are walking up to me going, hey, I got some questions about YouTube because I really like to do that, but I don't know how to get started. And so if that's basically everywhere I go, there are people who want to get started on YouTube, then I mean, you're probably talking like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Christians around the world who'd like to start making content, like to start putting out content, and just aren't sure how to get started. And so we're going to make something for them to get started. And then we're going to take over the internet. We're going to baptize the whole internet in the name of Jesus. And we're going to go down in history. It's going to be like, Pentecost, the Reformation, then us. You know what I mean? That's what it's going to be like.
Yes. So you're kind of like a Martin Luther reformer, right, David? I mean, come on. Hey, you know what's cool about this, though, bro? Well, first off, I want to say that Camden said David is often late to these things. So just to kind of like humble yourself a little bit.
Candace is a liar.
Candace is a liar. So
I'm normally like 1 or 2 minutes late or something like that. But that's just because I'm thinking, how many people are going to be there right on the second? Few people. So yeah. Anyway.
Well, you know what's cool about this? I like this vision because I feel like a lot of the standard conferences that are happening, the way that we do apologetics, we have to think about, I mean, there's going to potentially come a time where radio, that with the millennials, I mean, they hardly even watch radio or listen to radio. And so I think this vision where it's really unique is it's really going to allow us to grab the next generation. And I love the discipleship mentality that you do have here, because what I do see is you have over almost 500,000 subscribers, but you're not just doing this for yourself. Incredibly selfish and self-seeking as you do come off. You really do want to raise up other people, and I see that in you.
Mm-hmm.
That you don't want to just keep this. So some of the conferences that we're going to start doing, I know we're hoping to do one starting this spring. So I'm excited about this, and I'm excited to kind of delve into some of these questions.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I get on with somebody that's struggled with some mental things, you and I have had lots of conversations about this. You roast me because you said you thought that I had life together until you met me. And
yeah. See, everyone doesn't know this. Bobby here, right? Like I'd only watch like a couple of his videos ever, right? And I would watch him, and then like the production is all like really nice, and your hair is all perfect, and you're like, oh, look at me, I'm a perfect Christian, right? And I'm like, who is this goody two shoes Christian, perfect Christian? Not interested, right? So all the Christians that I was around for like the first several years that I was a Christian were all like ex-cons, and I mean, well, they were, it was all in prison, right? So they're all like ex-felons and stuff like that. And so these were the guys I was around, and I realized over time, actually, some of these guys are dudes you can trust with your life, right? They committed crimes and stuff like that, but they will die for you and stuff like that. So, some of the best friends I've ever had were these kinds of guys and stuff like that. So anyway, so now it's weird because after I got out, people would ask me to come like share my testimony at churches and stuff like that. And I would give I didn't like sharing my testimony just because, I never liked the, oh, look how bad I was, and now I'm a Christian sort of thing. Right. Like any idiot can fall down a hill, right? Look how far I fell down the hill, right?
Right.
That's gravity, man. We got a sin nature and stuff. So I was more impressed. I was more impressed with people who didn't do any of that stuff. And so part of the reason I didn't like, sharing my story was like these young dudes would come up to me afterwards and be like, yeah, I don't really have a testimony. I basically had, good Christian parents, and my mom would pray with us every time we walked out the door, and we've just always served God. And I'd be like, you've always served God and you think you don't have a testimony? That's like way cooler than, oh, look at all the horrible stuff I did in my life. So anyway, but so here's the weird thing, right? Here's the weird thing. I look at like, the really good Christians who grew up in Christian homes and have always served God. I look at them, like they're super cool. But if they're going to be, if people are going to be telling me stuff about life, there's part of me that's like, you've never been through anything, you goody two shoes. So anyway, I was watching you and I'm like, look at this perfect Christian. What can he possibly tell me about what could he possibly tell me about anything? If you want to, if you want to make some, video on parenting tips or something like that, do that. Go ahead and make those videos on parenting tips, since you obviously had perfect parenting, you perfect Christian. Other than that, don't tell me anything about life because you don't know anything. And anyway, then I started hanging out with Bobby. I'm like, this dude is messed up, man. He's more mental than I am. And so anyway, so yeah, Bobby is one wild dude. I don't know how you keep it together to even do any of this, as messed up as you are. So
well, I don't know either, bro. And yeah, the truth is I definitely don't have it all together. In fact, that would be the streamline of my story is, I mean, I was so uneducated in high school. I wanted to go to the military. I failed the ASVAB to get in the United States military 3 times.
Now, everyone think about that. He just said he failed it 3 times.
Yep.
Think about some of the, I mean, so he's lower than the dumbest guy who got into the military. That's right. He's dumber. That's what he just said. All right.
Yeah. So you needed a 31 to get in the Marine Corps. I failed it, waited a month, failed it again, waited 6 months, failed it the 3rd time. And I got a 27 the 3rd time. You needed a 28 to be an infantryman in the Army. So they gave me a waiver and I went and failed my physical. Yeah. So then the drugs, the alcohol, the promiscuity, just all that stuff. But you know what I found as a pastor is exactly what you said. When we talk about, it's been said before, when we talk about our strengths, it causes competition. But when we talk about our weaknesses, it brings about unity because we all have them. And so I think even in the world of apologetics, so often what we're trying to offer up are these great convincing answers, but our lives are not always convincing. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have to be vulnerable. We have to be real, especially with reaching the millennials. So God allowed someone like you to get saved. That's incredibly tweaked and jacked up so that people could have hope in this world, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and you too. That's why it's good for people to find out how screwed up you are. Is people will. What sucks is the movie that came into my head was Training Day, when he was when Denzel Washington's character was saying, "Hey, unless you get your hands dirty, no one's going to trust you." Which that doesn't really work out because he was really like evil and just a horrible person. But it's more along the lines of, so it's not, hey, people aren't going to trust you unless you get your hands dirty. It's when you've made it known how dirty your hands have been, then people start like, gosh, this dude could have kept all this a secret, but he's just letting it all hang out there. Seems like a dude I can trust because he doesn't have to tell me all this stuff. So anyway, point is, once it's more widely known, and I'm going to make it more widely known how messed up you are, then people are going to be like, whoa, this Bobby Conway has been through some stuff. He's not Mr. Perfect Christian. He is like super, super messed up Christian. How's this guy even functioning? If he can function, if he can live and do stuff and accomplish stuff for the kingdom, then I can too. And then, you're going to blow up, man. It's going to blow up even more.
All right, man. Well, that's good. Well, David, check it out. There's this, here's a question I got for you, bro. And I'd say to the audience, feel free to start sending in some questions that you guys might want to dialogue about. But let's talk about the purpose of your YouTube channel for a moment. Mm-hmm. If you had to kind of say, this is the purpose behind why I started a YouTube channel, and this is what my message is, what would that be?
I think there would have to be kind of at least 2 stages, because, when me and Nabil started posting stuff on YouTube, it was mainly for people who couldn't be at our live events and stuff like that. So it was kind of an afterthought. And this was before the channel was Act 17 Apologetics, because when we got our YouTube channel, it was a rule that you could only post, new channels could only post videos that are 15 minutes long. And so we're trying to post our debates that we were having with Muslims and stuff like that. And anyway, it was a Muslim named Yahya gave us, not Yahya Snow, everyone, Yahya Seymour, gave us his channel. It was an older channel so that we could post stuff on. So for a while we were posting there, but yeah, back then it was hey, you can't be at the debate because you live in a different country. So since you can't be there, we'll post it there, and that way you could still see it online. And it was eventually when I made a video, me and Nabil, called The Original Burn the Quran Day. Now it's called A Brief History of the Quran. But back then it was called The Original Burn the Quran Day because that guy Terry Jones down in Florida was announced he was having a Burn the Quran Day, and actually I debated him on whether that was a good idea and stuff like that. But at the same time, I was thinking, why are Muslims getting so upset that this guy's going to burn a Quran when Uthman, the third of the rightly guided caliphs, burned all the Qurans? He burned them all to cover up all the differences. So. And the reason is because Muslims just don't know about that, right? They don't know about their own, the history of their book. So Nabil and I were goofing off. We're already in a studio because we're doing some shows there. And I was like, hey, why don't we make a video on the history of the Quran, but we'll make it funny. And so we made that. And so we made a video. It's about all the changes to the Quran and why Uthman had to burn them all. And it was, I forget what it was, 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that afterwards, after we posted the video, because, we posted it and then wasn't thinking much about it. It was like 10 days or 2 weeks afterwards or something like that. And then I looked and saw that it had like 100,000 views. And I was looking at that, and then I saw YouTube Analytics, and I didn't know what YouTube Analytics was, but I clicked on Analytics, and it showed where people were watching the video. And like at the top was the United States, and then it'd be like Great Britain, and then Canada and Australia and so on. But it got down to like whatever it was, 6th or 7th place, and it said it was either 3.6% or 3.8% Pakistan. And I thought, wait, 3.6% of 100,000, that's like 3,600 people that we just told about the whole history of the Quran, all the information that no one gets, that no one ever gets in Pakistan. Because if you started telling people that, you end up with a violent mob saying you blasphemed the Quran or something like that. But 3,600 people had watched it in Pakistan. And that's kind of when it hit me that we have shifted, right? Like during the time of Jesus, if you wanted to get information out there, you'd have to, stand on the side of a hill and sort of talk to people and see how far your voice carries. Or they'd have sometimes like a relay system, like you're yelling it, and then guys were lower down there, they're repeating what you're saying, stuff like that. Or you might write something, but very, very, very slow moving process. And eventually you get to, the printing press, and then all of a sudden books are much cheaper, much easier to come by, and this spreads literacy and so on. So, it becomes easier to share information. Then you get to the radio age, and then you get to television, but to do television, you need a television studio and so on. And so all of a sudden you get to our time where you can get information. You can get information on the opposite side of the world to anyone with an internet connection instantly. And so it just hit me then that one, we're in a completely new era of history for sharing information. Two, that this doesn't just apply to Muslims. I was thinking primarily in terms of Muslims because that's who I was interacting with most. That for 14 centuries, Muslim leaders have been able to keep their people insulated. Keeping them closed off from hearing any sort of serious presentation of an alternative to Islam, but also keeping them from hearing criticisms and critiques of Islam. Because if you went around and started saying, hey, you guys are teaching that Muhammad's the greatest man ever, let me tell you all these bad things he did, you're going to get your head chopped off. So they're able to keep people closed off. And now all of a sudden, after 14 centuries, we're suddenly the generation that has open access to Muslims around the world. And so it was kind of looking at all that and realizing we are in the perfect position. And I don't want to stand before the Almighty and say, hey, you gave us every opportunity to reach people that, past generations could never reach, and past generations couldn't even have dreamed about having these opportunities, but we didn't take advantage of it. So kind of jumped on YouTube and could have done all kinds of other stuff, but yeah, YouTube is what I stuck with most.
When it comes to
wait, did you say one sentence for my channel? What did you say? I gave you asked me something like, what's the purpose of your channel? I was like, gosh, I just talked for like 10 minutes.
No, that's all right.
Yeah, okay.
You laid it out, and that's good.
All right.
we hear a lot about how Islam being, the second largest world religion. And, I sometimes wonder about like the statistics and how they derive at this. When you think about Islamic countries, because they're not free to think about other worldview live options that are out there, what is your sense on the legitimacy of people's belief in the Quran and in Allah? Do you feel like because of the control, it means they really do believe it? Or do you think that there is a lot of people that just don't have the freedom to think and they don't believe it, but when they're registered to say what they believe, they're going to say, I'm a Muslim?
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to person to person. Yeah, there are a lot, there are lots of people out there, and here's the upshot. There are lots of Muslims out there who've never heard any sort of serious presentation of any alternative to Islam. They've never heard any serious challenges to Islam, and they've been raised that way all their lives. So you can say, how serious is your belief in Islam? So that's the negative side, is that there are all these people out there in these Muslim countries whose confidence in Islam is kind of paper thin, and at the same time there are all kinds of people who don't really believe in Islam, but they're not going to say anything because it'd be pretty dangerous. It'd be pretty dangerous to say anything. But here's the positive side. If you have 1.6 billion Muslims, and at least hundreds of millions of those are in a position where they don't know how to deal with criticisms of Islam. They've never seriously thought through an alternative to Islam. All of a sudden, we get to be the generation that goes in there and says, hey, all these things that your leaders told you about the Quran and about Muhammad, yeah, that stuff's all wrong, and we can show you that from your own sources, that what they're telling you is wrong. Now, if you can't trust them on that stuff, what else have they misled you about? You need to look into these things for yourself and not just believe what your leaders have told you. And we've got some information here for you that you might want to consider if you're rethinking your position on religious matters. So, yeah, it's cool times, man. Cool times to be doing what we do.
The whole idea then behind some of the satire that you use,
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like that is hopefully going to be helpful in really exposing some of, just some of the ludicrous beliefs that maybe the Muslim would hold? Is that some of the motivation behind doing the satire?
Well, there are a few. There are a few reasons. One, I mean, even as we've discussed before, even in the Bible, there are situations. They're not super common, but there are situations in the Bible where someone very important will be just mocking someone else. And so, as a Christian, you have to think, okay, there are times and places where this is appropriate. So that's one consideration. Two is if you start thinking, okay, well, where would mockery be appropriate? Biblically, it's usually with like religious leaders who are leading other people astray. Those are the guys who are on the receiving end, Old Testament and New Testament. Those are the guys who are on the receiving end of mockery. And so if I'm thinking in those terms, then, out of anyone in history, who would fit those criterion more than Muhammad? He did all sorts of horrible things. He's led astray more people than anyone else in history. If anyone deserves to be mocked, it would have to be him. But the apart from that, the main idea is packaging information in different ways because there are different kinds of people, right? So there are people who, you can think there are people who get their information about various topics primarily through reading, right? There are people who get, their information primarily through videos nowadays and so on. So there are different kinds of people who pay attention to different things. But even the people who, let's say, watch videos, it can be different styles that they actually pay attention to. So there are people who like it when I'm just presenting facts and presenting sources. And when I make a goofy series like Islamicize Me or Vocab and I do an episode of Muhammad's Boom Boom Room, they actually don't like it. They would prefer the same content, but in a very normal, formal way of presenting it. But there are other people who just like, skits more. So, and there are people who they're far more interested, like their favorite thing that we do is the skits, right? They like those way more. They think they think something is boring if you're just presenting it, but if you're actually, enacting it and things like that, they find that much more entertaining. So it's mainly a consideration of there are different types of people who respond in different ways to different kinds of material, and we basically want to put the same sort of material, information that really needs to spread as far and as fast as possible. Because guys, we're in kind of dangerous times. We're in times where, if you're looking to the next few decades, that Islam within a few decades is supposed to eventually pass Christianity as the world's largest religion, not because of conversions, just because of birth rates. Muslims in sort of wherever they are, they have the highest birth rates, largely due to the impact Islam has on women and what women are allowed to do in society. And so it's basically, you're looking at a few decades when all of a sudden Islam would likely become a much bigger concern even than it is right now. And so you're kind of in a race to make sure that let me put it this way. You don't know what you're going to be allowed to say 30 years from now. So right now, while we're allowed to say things, allowed to say whatever we want, I want to get the information as far as we can. And part of that is packaging it for different kinds of people. So we're just kind of trying to put the relevant information into as much hands as possible, as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that helps give an explanation to some of the motivation. You're right. You think about in the book of Ezekiel and some of the ludicrous things, speaking of the word ludicrous, that he had to do, lay on your side for 390 days and then flip over and give me another 40. And you think about him playing with his pots and pans and his siege work. I remember when I was at Dallas Seminary, they acted that out in a skit, and it was actually hilarious. You just saw the absurdity of what his call was, or Isaiah, walking buck naked, some saying, oh, it was just undergarments, but either way, no calling you'd want to have, except for the person who was at, Berkeley years ago. He felt it. Let me ask you this. We know that obviously when it comes to some of the satire, the Christian world is going to get a little bit divisive around, yes or no. But as it relates to Muslims, have you found that you've had any interactions that you saw as positive from Muslims? I know you get death threats. I know you have lots of vitriol and incendiary remarks toward your ministry. But have you ever had people kind of offline say, man, you got me thinking, or my eyes have been open, or is that just not to be expected?
No, that's all the time. It was more so back a few years ago. I used to actually sort of skim through my YouTube comments, because you could go on YouTube and see and sort of scroll through all of your recent comments. But I forget how long ago this was, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. About 4 or 5 years ago on Facebook, I would, in the morning, I would sort of scroll through all my YouTube comments, and anyone who said, hey, after watching your videos for a while, I left Islam, or, hey, been following your stuff for a while, I became a Christian now. I would, when I saw one of those, I would take a screenshot and post it on Facebook. But those who are following my Facebook page back then will remember that when I was doing that, I was posting between 1 and 3 a day, every day, consistently. So just, scrolling my YouTube comments was seeing between 1 and 3 people who were leaving Islam daily. And now I don't go through all my YouTube comments anymore. I kind of, go through my most recent comments or something like that on yesterday's video. But basically, if it was 1 to 3 people a day I was hearing from back then, and you got to think, you're not hearing from everybody, because not everyone is out there posting, hey, I left Islam. There's a lot of people leaving Islam, and those were just people who were watching my channel. So if you think about all the Christian ministries and all the channels out there that are doing this work, there are a lot of people leaving Islam.
Yeah, that's really exciting to see the impact that your ministry's had in that way. Do you feel like in some ways, David, that the way that the Christians would perceive the new atheism movement, they would use a lot of satire. You just worship, a god who is a sugar bear, and they just kind of mock and ridicule. And you'll see, in particular, a lot of the millennials were influenced by that. Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, or Hitchens, and some of the others. Do you think in some ways you would be viewed as sort of a new atheist type within the Christian world as it relates to the Muslims, as one that feels kind of like a Richard Dawkins or a Harris to that movement, and they see some people going away with it because you do put such light on some of the issues that need to be faced?
Yeah, I mean, my objection to those guys, my objection to, Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and stuff is not, hey, Christopher Hitchens, you're being exceptionally, witty and sarcastic in what you're saying. It's what you're saying is wrong, right? What you're saying is wrong, and the way you're packaging it is brilliant. The way you're packaging your material is phenomenal, but it's the content that I object to. So it's basically a situation of if what I were saying was false about Islam, or if all I were doing were mocking it for the sake of mockery or something like that, I think you could, you might, put me in the same category as those guys. But you could go to any of them. You could go to any episode of Muhammad's Boom Boom Room, watch it, and say, what is the message here? Everything is content based, right? Everything. You can go to any video, and there is content and sources there telling you that's stating facts that people need to know. The satire, the mockery, things like that. That's just to package content which needs to be known. But we don't. The sort of takeaway from the new atheism, if you actually listen to these guys, and not necessarily even the leaders, but just the guys who are constantly trolling online and stuff, is basically everyone's stupid except us, and as long as you adopt our position, you're in the smart crowd. And if you're on the religious side, you're in the dumb crowd and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we're not like that. Where this is information that Muslims need. This is information that Christians need. This is information that everyone needs, because there is so much deception going on right now, and the best way we can expose the deception is by getting the facts out there as quickly as we can. And so, let's package those facts in every reliable way we can, put them out there, and help people. So our goal is not to say Muslims are stupid or something. It's to help Muslims, right? Muslims have been lied to all their lives by their leaders. And we don't like that. We don't like that. We want them to know the truth. And so, I think we have, kind of different methodologies, different goals, different views of people than you might find from a lot of the new atheists.
Yeah, no, I definitely would see that the goals would be different, but maybe the threat that the new atheists feel to some people who have a vulnerable faith, maybe the people who have vulnerable faith within Islam, you would kind of be the person as kind of a threat for the Islamic community to want to shut down. Now, Nate 2D said, I hear David Wood is going to be doing something called Doctrine for the Block next week. What is Doctrine for the Block?
Oh yeah, so we're doing our meetings down in South Carolina, and I leave, I believe, I fly out that Thursday, me and Vocab, and we're flying back to Phoenix. We're flying back to Phoenix for an apologetics conference out there in Phoenix, which will be Friday and Saturday. So what are those dates? Nate, go ahead and post those. Go ahead and post those dates. See, Nate's pretending that he's asking, but he knows. So he's just trying to make sure other people know about the conference. So Nate, go ahead and post those dates. So it's not, it's not this coming Friday and Saturday. It's the following Friday or Saturday. But go to Vocab Malone's channel. So just type in Vocab Malone for anyone who's in that area, in the Phoenix area. But I'll be there. Vocab will be there. Sam Shimon will be there. A bunch of other people will be there, and be having an apologetics conference.
Oh, cool. Adam Sullivan, appreciate the comment. Let's talk about Bobby's appearance on Pastor's Perspective. That was cringy. Maybe just some clarification. Hey man, I just got to get up and throw a t-shirt on and come into the studio. So if I needed a button up on or something, help me out, bro. But thank you. Have something come up here and help me know what you mean. It says one person said, I can see Bobby's mom being loud or something like that, and me having to call out and say, Mom, keep it down. Let's see here. Yeah, so throw up some questions, guys, that you want you want David me to ask David, and I'm happy to jump in on some stuff too. Hey, what's to say? Grow in Christ before you label what's fake. You adulterers, you smokers, you liars, you snakes, repent. Thank you, Night Bloodfire, for the heartwarming words. Let's see here. Nate Didu is going, and I don't know what that was supposed to say here. Wage jihad on the like button. One thing I'd say, just as it relates to just internet vitriol, it's easy, isn't it, just to jump on and just kind of say statements. I know someone like you just eat it up. What is your thought on our rhetoric as Christians and what this does for our overall message, David?
Which part? You mean these in the comment section or for?
What should be the place? Like you told me, we disabled comments on YouTube for a long time just because it kind of crushed my heart, even just seeing the way Christians would speak toward each other. And I found myself just thinking, man, I hate to, as a person who wrote the fifth gospel and wanting to make sure the church is shining for Christ, I thought, man, I hate seeing what goes on here. You said, dude, you gotta enable them. So I enabled my comments.
Yeah.
That helps with stuff. When you read through the comments and you just start seeing stuff, what kind of, if you were speaking about to Christians, what would you say would be kind of like, what should our tone be like as it relates to comments with Muslims or other believers online? Should we be being ridiculing, mean-spirited, putting them down? What kind of approach would you say?
I would say it depends on the situation, right? If Jesus was dealing with some religious leaders who were sort of lording it over people, he approached that person differently than he would speak to a leper or a woman who was a social outcast or something like so. So it kind of depends on the situation. But we are in an era right now where the internet is making people massively meaner than they would otherwise be. And part of that is, when you're speaking to someone face to face, normal people have empathy and stuff like that. And hey, my words might hurt this person. And this person's going to be looking at me and know exactly who it is who's saying these horrible things. And then, this person's going to start crying and I'm going to be sitting here and, I'm the one who caused the crying and all of these things. That's the sort of thing that would be going on if you're talking to a person, that's right in front of you. But online, on the internet, things are just way more anonymous. Like my channel is my channel, but lots of these people know. There are lots of people who you don't know who you're talking to, and so they just feel that they can be as mean as they want, and there are kind of no consequences for it. And so the trend has been for lots of people just to get nastier and nastier and nastier, more abusive in their comments. And so, yeah, guys, as Christians, you're talking to a guy who believes there is a place for mockery. There's a place for open rebuke. There's a place for public rebuke. There's a place for putting people in their place. But you should always be thinking, hey, what is most appropriate? What is the best way to get information across in this situation? And is saying this offensive thing the best way to get this information across rather than some other way? Because I've had people tell me, like, there was this college student who contacted me and said, hey, David, I know some Muslims here at college and they wanted to talk to me and And so I watch your videos. So I just blasted them with Aisha and all this other stuff. And I'm thinking, no, I do that in my videos because people who are watching, you don't have to click on my video if you don't want to, right? If you follow my channel, you have an idea of what you're getting and so on like that. The way I talk to Muslims, if I'm trying to have a conversation, is very different from me talking about Muhammad in a YouTube video. Just like the way I speak at a conference is different from the way I might speak at a debate, which is different from the way I might speak in a video, which is different than I would write something, which is different from having a conversation with someone. So it kind of depends on the situation there. But I told that woman, I said, no, if you're trying to make any sort of lasting impact on a Muslim that you're going to be seeing regularly, and you're going to have many opportunities to see these people and talk to them, you probably should, be taking steps to make sure that that conversation continues and they don't think you're the biggest jerk they've ever met in your life and never want to talk to you again. And so there are different ways to go about it. But in that people were wondering, oh, well, what are you saying, that we don't bring up all these things? No, I'm saying there are different ways to bring up the same material, and you should be thinking, what is the best way to get this information across? Because if you're talking to someone, keep in mind, this woman brought up things like Aisha. That's just, for anyone who doesn't know, Aisha was Muhammad's child bride. He married a girl when she was 6 or 7 and then consummated the marriage. He had sex with her when she was 9 years old. And so this is a sensitive topic for Muslims. But in that situation, right, if suppose you want to get that information into the Muslim's head so that that person can then think about the things that Muhammad did when this Muslim is trying to evaluate whether Muhammad is this great man. Well, notice you can say, hey, your prophet had sex with a 9-year-old girl. Doesn't that make him a pedophile? You can say it like that. And that might, get the information into his head a little bit. But notice you could present the exact same information very differently that might be much more effective. So you could say, hey, you were telling me that Muhammad is, this great man, and is one of the he's the most wonderful man in history, and that we can know he's a prophet because of his shining example. But I was reading an article, and it was raising some concerns about a relationship that he had with one of his wives. I was wondering, could you look through that article for me and look at the sources and so on, and then give me your perspective and tell me what you think as a Muslim and how you reconcile this with your belief that he's, this great moral example. And so notice there, you're not blasting, you're not insulting, you're asking this other person for more information. In that situation, you're more likely to get more information into the person that he wasn't familiar with than you would if you just insulted him and that was the last time he ever talked to you, right? So yes, basically pay attention to the situation, and lots of nastiness going on the internet. And I think nowadays you actually might stand out more if you're the nice and reasonable one, and in the comment section or in the chat or something like that, than just blasting away with insults. Again, I'm someone who I believe there's a place for insults. I believe there's a place for rebuke. I believe there's a place for mockery, but it depends on the situation, and it's definitely not all the time. So.
Yeah, and I think that the judgments that you make are derived after research. For example, when my book, The Fifth Gospel, came out, I wrote that after a quote said by the late British evangelist Gypsy Smith. He says there's 5 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the Christian. Most people will never read the first 4. So I said, our life or the church or Christians are the 5th Gospel, not an inspired gospel, but hopefully an inspiring one. Well, the Blaze picked up the book, did an article, and says pastor reveals another gospel, but it was written in a good way at the Blaze. But what happened is you saw a bunch of Christians going in and they're blasting me as the author. Yeah, pastor reveals another gospel. And the funny thing is they're making a judgment on a quick appearance, or they're making a judgment without any research that if they were to open the book, they would see that they're stoning their own. And that's where I get concerned sometimes. See, when I look at what you're doing, I've read this, I've studied it, I've thought it out, and here's why I make the judgments I make. I see a lot of soundbite judgments where people don't really give people a chance.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really know people, and that's the thing that I would want to resist against.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I noticed we had a super chat on there, and I can't find it. Do you see that? I think it was Jay-Z. He had a question.
The Jay-Z? No, it's Jay
Oh,
Shy.
Jay Shy. All right, yeah.
You think Jay-Z is like
yeah.
Beyonce, I'm not going to pay attention to you. I want to go watch Bobby Conway and David Wood. Come on, dude.
Yeah, bro. I mean, hey, we're trying to reach the internet world. Jay-Z, give it up, man. Hey, but Jay Shy for $4.99 a super chat. Question goes to the top. Thank you so much. And what's his question there? You see it, David?
Yeah. He says, David, have you seen? I think that's supposed to be Apologia. Yeah. So there's an atheist called Apologia. I've only ever seen one of his videos. It was a horrible disaster. Me and Apostate Prophet. I mean, not Apostate Prophet. Me and Inspiring Philosophy actually went through it and showed this guy has no clue what he's talking about. He doesn't know what the arguments are. He doesn't know, he doesn't know what the terms he's using mean. He hears Christians talking about things and raising arguments and stuff, doesn't understand them, and sort of responds based on his own misunderstandings of things. But apparently he posted a response. And so the question here is, have I seen the response? No. It's basically, if I watch your video and it's just a disaster and you don't know what you're talking about, and then you post a response and I already know ahead of time, you have no clue what you're talking about. Yeah, you have to deal with the atheist trolls who will just praise anything because they don't understand the arguments either. To be clear, I'm not just, I'm not insulting atheists here. There are brilliant atheist philosophers out there who, I went to a conference with Massimo Pigliucci. That guy's an atheist, but that guy was in a different category of intelligence than anyone in the room, including the Christians that I was there with. So they're brilliant atheists, but the guys, basically, if you're watching Apologia's videos and you're just absorbing him and thinking he's schooling Christians, and this guy doesn't know anything he's talking about, doesn't know what the terms mean, and so on, it's going to be kind of hard to persuade you because you're not. I don't even know how to describe it. There's just these online mobs who will praise anything that their guy says and insult and shout down anyone who refutes him. And so it's he's basically not big enough for me to want to get involved with that way, right? Yeah. So if I want to address some, I only watched his one video because I never heard of the guy. I only watched his one video because I got a request from a Christian when we were out in California. Matter of fact, that was the same trip you were on. It was just at the apologetics conference afterwards. I was at the apologetics conference and some guy said, "Hey, could you make a response to this video?" And then I said, "Well, send me the link later." And he sent me the link. And so I asked I was going to go live with Inspiring Philosophy. And so I was like, "Hey, you want to go through, we need something to talk about. So why don't we go through this video clip that this other guy asked me to respond to?" Yeah, so it's basically there's all kinds of stupid stuff out there, right? Yeah. There's all kinds of dumb stuff being said. If I'm going to respond to someone's dumb stuff, I probably want it to be like Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris or something like that, because they just have way more people watching. So yeah, I'm probably not going to watch it. If Inspiring Philosophy says, "Hey, I want to go through this guy's video and show once again that this guy has no clue what he's talking about," I'd be happy to do that. But if I'm sitting there thinking, "Hey, what am I going to take up my time with?" It's probably Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris, and not, some sort of random YouTuber that I'd never heard before. In a similar way that if I'm going to make a video about a Muslim apologist, it'll usually be someone like Zakir Naik or someone like that, not, some random guy with, a couple followers, something.
Yeah, that makes sense. So my battery's at 6%. I'm going to charge it. That means I have to unplug my mic. So when I unplug my mic, it's unplugged now. How's my sound? Is it okay? Or
it sounds exactly the same. So I don't even know if your mic was on.
Oh, okay. Well, dude, it probably wasn't on, bro. Knowing me.
Wow.
Yeah, it probably wasn't on. So we got a question in from Nate Lawrence.
Bobby Conway.
He says,
"I know how to plug a mic in." Well,
Yeah, dude, I told you, bro, I couldn't pass the ASVAB for the military, dude.
No, Bobby, just so you know, for future reference, right? Even when you plug a microphone in, this doesn't mean that. Oh, what that means is you now have two mics, right? You have your computer mic,
Yep.
and you have the one that you plugged in. So
Okay.
sometimes you might have to tell either your computer or the program you're using which one you're using, right? So like when you were logging onto this system, if you look, if you go to the link, it'll say which camera. Like I have two cameras hooked here. One is a webcam, and the other one's the one that's built into the computer. I actually had to select this one, so it's probably the same situation with the mic. It'll probably ask you, do you want your built-in computer microphone or that or the one you plugged into it? So
good point. Hey, Nate Lawrence asked, he says, I was at a missions conference a couple weeks ago. He sat in a session on Islam, and they were claiming that Aisha was 9 or 11 when engaged or married. And he was wondering if you had some sources that you could share or clarify.
Sources on the age of Aisha? Hang
Yeah.
on. Nate Lawrence says, I was at a missions conference a couple weeks ago and sat in a session on Islam. They were claiming Aisha was 9 or 11 when engaged and married. Oh, so claiming that she was 9 when she was engaged, apparently, and then 11 when married. Can David clarify different sources?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any source. I'm not aware of any source that says she was 11 when she was married. So you can go to Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Abu Dawud, and those of you who know what I'm talking about, you know those are the three main those are the three main collections on the life of Muhammad for Muslims. So basically, what you have here is, I would say, this is, again, I don't know of a source that says that. What you will find, you can go to these sources. Some of them will say she was 6 years old when she was technically married. That's when they write a contract saying that you're married now. That doesn't mean you've consummated the marriage, right? It's just like if you have a wedding ceremony, that doesn't mean you've consummated the marriage and actually had sex with a woman. But she was. Some of the sources will say that she was 6 when the marriage was established and in contract, and some will say that she was 7 when the marriage contract was written. And you can see why that is. If she was basically if it's somewhere on the border of when she was 6 and 7, I can look back to things that happened when I was 6 and 7 and go, was that when I was 6 or was that when I was 7? But the sources are totally consistent. The main sources are totally consistent on Aisha being 9 years old when she was taken to Muhammad's house to consummate the marriage with her. So that's when they had sex. We also know from other details that she hadn't reached puberty yet. So she was prepubescent. Muhammad had sex with a prepubescent 9-year-old girl. If you want all the sources, you can just go to one of my videos. I put the sources all over the screen. I think a recent video is well, just type in David Wood Age of Aisha or something like that. One of my videos will pop up. But if you want an article on it, just go to Answering Islam, the website Answering Islam. Type into Google the Age of Aisha and its moral implications. Sam Shamoun's video will pop up there. I mean, Sam Shamoun's article at Answering Islam will pop up there. But Sam actually goes through way more sources than even I go through. So I normally will quote like the main Muslim sources. So I'll go Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Abu Dawud. Sam quotes those, but then just keeps going down the list of Muslim sources, going all over the place, going to the commentaries and so on. So yeah, Nate, I would say that's kind of absolute nonsense there. I don't know who was telling you that, but when someone says something like that, I would say, give me your source if you're saying she was 11. And notice, by the way, it's still kind of creepy that the greatest man in the history of humanity, according to Muslims, had sex with an 11-year-old girl. But yeah, even that's not right.
Well, on to more serious discussion. Luis says, have you guys heard of the real Heisenberg on TikTok?
No, who's that?
Yeah. So I didn't know if this was off the Netflix program and with Heisenberg. And there's a TikTok, I think, that they did like a final series or like a one episode on Breaking Bad or something like that.
Oh yeah.
If what she's referring to, and I think I've heard about it and heard it was great, but haven't seen it.
Oh, hey, 1 second, just to clarify, guys, we weren't talking about Apologia, which is a Christian, Reformed Christian apologetics ministry and channel. We're talking about Paulogia. I think it's just the guy's name is Paul probably, and he made it sound like Apologia, but he went with Paulogia. So we were talking about an atheist channel named Paulogia, not a Christian channel called Apologia.
Yes, exactly. So today, as it relates to Islam, where do you think things are right now with the strength of some of these terrorist groups like ISIS? I know that it seems like at times we have a lot of news that's getting out there, and a lot of hype, a lot of fear, and then it seems like it quiets down a little bit. How do you think those movements are doing right now?
Yeah, well, the situation you have in Islam, this goes back to the life of Muhammad. Muhammad laid down a pattern in his life, and the Quran even calls him the pattern of conduct for Muslims. But basically, when Muhammad was completely outnumbered in Mecca, couldn't hope to win a physical confrontation with the unbelievers, Allah ordered him to preach a message of peace and tolerance. Like, there's a future judgment. You guys are all in trouble at the future judgment, but for right now, to you be your religion and to me be my religion, right? That's the end of it. Well, Muslims will point to passages of this time and say, you see, Islam is peaceful and tolerant. Well, those weren't the end of the revelations, because Muhammad kept receiving revelations, and as he won more and more followers and built various alliances, eventually when Muhammad got powerful enough, the message of Islam changed, and it changed to a message of defensive jihad. So if people are persecuting the Muslim community, you fight them. Even if they're making fun of Muhammad or something, you fight them. But the idea is it's defensive in the sense that other people have to start it with you. You're not running out and trying to just fight random people. And so Muslims will point to verses that were revealed during this stage and say, you see, Islam only calls for fighting and self-defense. So who doesn't agree with self-defense? Problem is that wasn't the end of the revelations either. Still later, when Muhammad became the most powerful force in Arabia, the message changed once again, and it changed to fight those who do not believe. And here, this was offensive jihad, right? Now you're going out and violently subjugating people, forcing them in the case of pagans and groups like that, you would force them to convert or you'd be killed. In the case of Christians or Jews, these had the option, since according to Islam they have true revelation, they had the option where they could either convert to Islam or pay the jizya. That's a kind of tribute money you paid to acknowledge that Muslims were superior to you. Or if you didn't do that, then you'd be killed. So Christians and Jews had that extra option. So those are the different situations that we find during the life of Muhammad. And what's interesting is you can basically point to any country in the world, and it follows this pattern. If you go to a place like the United States, where Muslims make up around 1% of the population, what's the message of Islam? Well, it's peace and tolerance. That's what Islam is, right? You go to certain places in Europe or certain places in Africa where, the Muslim population is 30, 40% or something like that. They're not subjugating the population, but you're not going to be allowed to do anything or even say anything critical of Islam, or there's going to be a violent reaction to that. And then you have places where Muslims are the most powerful force, and there non-Muslims are going to be second-class citizens and so on. So you have groups like Al-Qaeda, right, or Hamas or Hezbollah. You have these kinds of groups, and if you notice, they always sort of couch their attacks in defensive terms. So they would very clearly state, you did this to us. You, the aggressor, did this to us. And that's why we're retaliating. So they're trying to show that they are justified in waging defensive jihad, right? And the reason for that is, I haven't found anything that actually comes from Muhammad that says this, but it is a very common belief in Islam that only the caliph, the Islamic caliph, the leader of the Islamic community in total, is allowed to wage offensive jihad, is allowed to actually go out and subjugate unbelievers simply for being unbelievers. So the idea is, again, I'm not getting this from Muhammad. I'm getting this, but this is just a popular belief in Islam, that any Muslim who's being attacked in a situation where you would be employing defensive jihad, you're allowed to wage defensive jihad. So if you regard Israel as doing something to you, you can fight them. If you regard the United States as doing something horrible to you, you can fight them. It's defensive jihad. But they believe that only the caliph, the leader of the caliphate, the global community of Muslims, only the caliph can wage offensive jihad and actually go out conquering. And so that's why it was a concern when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi came out and said, hey, this is the caliph and I'm this is the caliphate and I'm the new caliph, because now you're dealing with a different sort of thing. So if you notice, anyway, the point here is, if you notice, groups like Al-Qaeda and so on, they're always very careful to say, we're only defending ourselves against the aggressors. The United States is doing horrible things in Muslim lands and interfering and killing Muslims and blowing up Muslims. That's why we're retaliating against you. So they view themselves as retaliating in order to justify their attacks. That's why they were careful to say that's what they were doing. When you get to ISIS, notice they don't care much about justifying their attacks in terms of defense. If we're the caliphate and we get to go out and subjugate and take sex slaves and do all these things. And so, fortunately that failed miserably, but man, people did get a pretty brutal education in true Islam. And actually someone contacted me because a few years before that, so I don't even remember when this was, this might've been 2000, maybe 2011, something like that. I went out and recorded a video series with Matt Slick. And I was saying, if you ever got a group of Muslims who were in the right situation and believed that they could actually go into, that they were actually in stage 3, where they have the authority to go out and subjugate. I said, here's what you're going to get, right? They're going to take sex captives. They're going to be doing these executions like this and stuff. And I went through it. And anyway, after the rise of ISIS, I got contacted by the tech guy for that ministry. And he said, I was watching that and it was like, dude, you sound like a prophet, because they did exactly what you said they would do if they ever got in that situation. Well, there's a reason we're reading the same sources, right? We're all reading the same sources on what you're supposed to do in various situations. And so fortunately, ISIS failed. I hope that there is never another group that's in a position to do that. But if you ever get to, if I had to guess, I would say, because again, Islam is growing primarily due to birth rates. But if you get enough people, they're going to view themselves as being the new caliphate, and they're going to make claims about that. And then once again, you'll see people from all around the world flooding into that territory because they're claiming to be the caliphate. And that's that, Muslims want that. They want to be part of the caliphate, right? That's the Muslim community. You don't want to live in the land of the unbeliever all your life. So sad situation, but that's what it teaches.
Yeah, no, that's a good explanation. VB says, do you believe that the gifts of the Spirit are taught by Paul, are still active today? And if not, why not? I would say, just jumping in with you on this particular issue, you do have people who I would say that are cessationists, and that would be those who believe that after the apostles that the gifts kind of died off, that those were there for apostolic authority to show who they were, to give confirmation of them as messengers. And then they'll say once the scripture was in place, when that which is perfect comes, they say refers to the scripture, that those gifts are no longer needed. I've been at cessationist schools. I personally am not a cessationist. Then you get people that are, they go from one extreme to the other, kind of, just swinging from one extreme to the next. And that's often what the church does, right? They go from one extreme to the next, and then people are swinging from, chandeliers. And, you don't hear a ton about Mark Driscoll with all that went down, but I did like his statement that I'm charismatic in a seatbelt. And I do think that would be my particular position, that I wouldn't see that the gifts have ceased. I don't think that there's modern day apostles in the sense that they've been an eyewitness of the resurrection. There are people who have apostolic giftings. The Greek word apostolos means to be sent out. So there are people who are sent out with a vision, maybe to plant a church. They're apostolic in the way that they live their life. And then when it relates to certain things with the gifts, we have to be very, very discerning. As it relates to tongues, it would say there would have to be an interpreter. I don't speak in tongues, but I feel like I've known some people that I trust that they're very, very godly, and they say that they do. And I just would say, look, I look at the scripture, and I think the argument for cessationism is weaker with saying when that which was perfect comes, that refers to the Bible. I think that refers more to the eschaton. Where are you at on this, David? Are you kind of a cessationist? Are you a sensationalist, or are you a charismatic in a seatbelt?
I'd probably be closest to charismatic in a seatbelt. Although I don't even know if I'd be in that category. But basically, no, I believe that the gifts that we read about, I'd be on the same page with you. I don't believe in apostles for today. But as far as, the gifts, healings and things like that, nope, I believe those are still active. I do kind of favor the view that they're more active in places that need them. You know what I mean? And you see this going way back into the Old Testament. So when the children of Israel were in the desert, God's raining manna from heaven on them and so on. But when they got to the land, they still have the manna and stuff, but it said once they started eating the fruits of the land, then the manna stopped. And so the idea was, hey, you're in the desert, you have no food source, then you get this miraculous feeding. But once you can get fed natural feedings, right, just by the fruits of the land, then you didn't get the miracles anymore. So I believe in miracles all over the world. I believe there's good evidence for that. There's a Pew Research study. They examined one denomination in 10 countries. So one Christian denomination in just 10 countries. And they were already they found about 200 million people who believed they had witnessed a miracle. So if you're talking just 10 countries and just one Christian denomination, then if you were to basically poll everyone in the world, it seems like you'd be well over 1 billion people who believe they've witnessed a miracle. So that's a lot of evidence to just say, nope, cessationism, they're all wrong. Yeah. I think you'd be kind of in the same category of, almost like an atheist who's just saying, I don't care I don't care. I can reject every one of your claims. That's true. An atheist can reject every single miracle claim, and a Christian could reject every single miracle claim, but that is a lot of people to be wrong about something they've witnessed, right? We believe that lots of people are wrong about what they believe. They're talking about people who believe they've witnessed. So again, somewhere in the ballpark of 1 billion people who believe they've witnessed a miracle. Yeah. Pretty strange to just say, nope, every last one of them is wrong. So I believe in matter of fact, you go to places like China, and I think it's somewhere in between. I think the statistics were somewhere in between, I think 30 to 50% of new converts in China, where the church is exploding. I think 30 to 50% of new converts become converts because of they believe they've witnessed a miraculous healing or something like that. So it's a situation where, you look to places that really don't have a lot of medical facilities, medical resources. And, from a Humean perspective, Hume looked down on it and would say, hey, the more advanced places, we don't see miracles. It's in these backwards places, right? And so he thinks David Hume, the famous Scottish agnostic, I actually think he's more of a deist, but his thinking is prominent. His thinking is kind of dominant among atheists. But Hume's position was basically, look, the educated people, we don't see those kinds of things. It's the backwards people among the more savage people. They're the ones that keep seeing the miracles. And so his his view was they're stupider. That's why they don't know the difference between, something happening naturally and something being miraculous. You can't trust them. They're dumb. Whereas, from a Christian perspective, you'd say, well, guess what? In a place like this where we have hospitals and doctors and things, we kind of don't need, the miraculous as much as other places would. And so I'm kind of in that ballpark.
Well, no, I think that's those are good statements right there. I mean, there's a more of a concentration when the need seems to be greater, and when there's different things such as the medicinal approaches that we have, that certainly can be helpful. I think Hume, obviously, I think his whole argument against miracles can be well refuted. I mean, he struggles that things can't be repeated. So if a miracle is something that's not repeatable, then it's not testable, so we shouldn't believe it. But the whole point of a miracle is that it what he talked about is a violation of nature. We would just say it's God intervening. Like if apple's falling and gravity is making it descend, and you reach out your arm, you intervene. You don't violate the law of nature. Gravity still takes place, but you intervene. And so miracles too, when you look at the scripture, by and large, a miracle is set in place to confirm that a messenger was from God. And I think we look at the scriptures sometimes, 1,189 chapters, and we think, my goodness, the Bible's just replete with miracles, but it's actually not as replete as we might think. It's really at transitional stages. So you see, miracles happening with Moses as he's going to lead the people into the wilderness, and God's going to set up his, theocracy, and he's confirmed as God's messenger. And then Joshua is confirmed as the successor. There's miracles. And then the season of the prophets with Elijah and Elisha. And then when Christ comes on the scene, he's confirmed as the messenger of God, the Son of God, and then the apostles. And then we see then in the eschaton. But when you wrap up the total amount of miracles in the Bible, it's really, when you consider how many years the Bible was constructed over, you would have about one miracle for every, I forget how many years, like every several decades, if you take the amount of miracles. We're just so aware of how lively they are. Now, I have a question that came in that I thought was a good question as it relates to morality. How do we get at what the true morality is? Plugged Into Leadership says there seems to be several different moral codes. How do we know what is the correct one? This is a particular area of interest to me with my PhD research is on the moral argument. For a good appendix as it relates to morality, in his Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis details how different societies and cultures, by and large, have a good sense of big picture moral ideas. When it comes down to grounding morality, we get into a difficulty. So the atheists, they're going to struggle with grounding morality. So their explanations for morality might be survival of the fittest. Charles Darwin would say, well, it's reflective capacity. You look back and you reflect on decisions that could inhibit your survival. So you reflect through your reason, and that's what distinguishes us from animals, is that we're rational reflectors, and therefore we can make better decisions moving forward. Utilitarianism with like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, they would talk about different angles of morality, that you do what is most advantageous for the most amount of people. Then when it comes to, Christian theism, we believe that God's moral laws written on our heart, Romans chapter 2, that we have general revelation, Psalm 19, Romans chapter 1, that gives us the sense that there's a powerful God who created all this. He's written his moral law on our heart. So we have this conscience, but then we have added scripture, that the revealed scripture, and that can aid us. So we would say when people talk about, non-believers, how can a non-believer be good? How can they do good? They can do good things because they're created in the image of God. The law is written on their heart, but they can't be saved because through trying to do good works. Their nature is still flawed. And so when we look at these different deals and how to get to the big moral, answer, one thing that I do is I argue from guilt to God. And I say that, look, let's talk about the different alternative explanations. How do we explain our guilt on naturalism? And so I look at like Nietzsche or Darwin or Freud, or I consider neuroscience, and all of these things on naturalism. You're going to have different explanations that are purely subjective. You're going to have cultural relativism. You can end up like, you might become a moral Platonist, and you try to ground your morals in Platonism, but these are just free-floating moral abstract objects. So why should we be morally culpable or accountable to this morally abstract object? So I think that has problems. Eric Wielenberg talks about this in some of his writings. So then it comes to, let's look at arguing from guilt. And I kind of argue from our guilt to getting at the best explanation for God. So what can we learn about our guilt? Well, our guilt tells us that we've offended, that it requires someone to be offended. So God must be personal. Only a God who is personal can be offended. A personal abstract object on moral Platonism can't be offended. You can't offend a free-floating abstract object. What does the Platonic object of fairness care if I act unfairly? But God cares. So God is personal. He can be offended. Guilt, we have this sense that we're being watched. And not only that, we can learn something about the nature of God, because guilt is a universal experience. Now, David is a psychopath, and he talks about that, and I've done videos with him on the 1 Minute Apologist. He doesn't have guilt feeling, but he can recognize the fact of his guilt. So he can come to Christ through the atonement, even though he doesn't feel guilty. He can recognize rationally that he is morally culpable for breaking God's moral law, as shown in his conscience and revealed in Scripture. Yet Christ fulfills that on our behalf. So all that to say, we know that the idea then of guilt is universally recognizable. People in all different cultures have this concept, this idea of what it means to break a moral law. So that being said, then what about those like David who don't feel guilt? Well, I'm colorblind. That does not mean there's not real color. It means that I have to recognize the deficiency in the fact that I'm colorblind, but there is real color. So then you get to this idea that this would require God to be personal. It would require that he could be offended. It would require then that he be all-knowing, because only an all-knowing God could account for this universal sensation that we all experience guilt. It would require that we're accountable to him, and that he's just to hold us accountable. So these are some things that you go, okay, well, you can get to theism philosophically through this kind of an argument. Then the question is, what is the best solution? And when you look at Islam, I don't think that the answer is the best there. Christianity simply fulfills Judaism. And I think that the solution to guilt looks Christian shaped. So I argue philosophically from guilt to God, get to theism. Then I argue from Christ, from God down to Christ in the atonement, to dealing with and eradicating our guilt. So I think Christianity is the best explanation to count for our morality. Any thoughts you want to add to that, David?
Yeah, I would. I mean, if you're just talking about different moral codes or different, basically philosophies of morality and so on, it's basically my first concern is what can you defend, right? In other words, when someone says, hey, you should do this, or you should not do this, or you ought to do this, or you ought not to do that, or this is good and that is bad, what's your basis for saying that? And it's either going to be, feeling or personal preference, or they're actually going to have some basis for that. And so, if you're looking at different moral codes and so on, that's the first thing I would be looking for. What justification do you have for your moral claims? And the second thing I would normally be looking for is, do you end up with different? Do you end up with absurdities if I just take what you say seriously and then I follow it through to its conclusion? What do you end up with? So just to give you an example here, when you have a discussion with atheists on the moral argument, they usually don't realize it, but all their stuff comes down to feelings. And I'll be questioning what they say, and eventually they will just say, "Oh, if you think that way, then you're a psychopath, and we can't explain it to you." And the reason I find that interesting is psychopaths lack certain feelings. We understand arguments, right? So we can understand reasons. We don't have the same feelings you have. So if I'm saying, "Hey, the moral claims you're making, they just seem to be like your personal feelings," and then you say, no, they're not, and you try to defend it, but then you say, I can't understand it, when the only thing I can't really understand are your feelings, then really you're kind of admitting that your entire moral system is based on your personal feelings. So that's one thing. A lot of people are basing their views of right and wrong on their feelings, and their feelings can often be sort of indoctrinated into them over time, right? You can tell little kids from the time they're born all the way up until they're grown up that doing such and such is wrong, and they will have a bad feeling about doing that. That doesn't tell you whether something is really right or wrong. So so I would say you gotta go outside of your feelings, and the question is, what are you going to? The other thing is, which I mentioned, that what kind of absurdities do you end up with? So I was talking to. He was a Buddhist at the time, but sort of a moral relativist type of guy. And he was telling me that his rule is, as long as you're not hurting someone else, it's not wrong. Now, notice, even that you can say, why? Why is that? Why is that a moral rule? But the other thing you can do, apart from asking for the justification, is just to say, okay, let me follow that through to where it leads. And you can just start giving the person different scenarios. Would this be wrong? So with that particular individual, I said, okay, so, what if a person is having sex with an animal, but the animal doesn't, let's suppose you're studying the animal's brain waves and stuff like that, and it's not hurting it, right? Let's suppose the animal is enjoying that. Would you say that's okay? And he gave some argument along the lines of animals can't consent and things like that. But notice now he seemed to be adding to his moral claim, which is just, as long as you're not harming someone else. But I just said fine and just kept going with it. And so I started asking about child pornography. What if someone wants to watch child pornography and look at child pornography? And he said, well, no, because that could lead him to, want to actually go out and do it. And so the situation we finally ended up in, and this is, you're basically looking for a situation that doesn't violate his claims in any way, but that he still should recognize there's something wrong with, and that his claims can't account for it. And the situation that I ended up with is, all right, suppose there's a guy who's locked in prison. He's already locked up for child molestation or something. And he's going to be there for the rest of his life. Should he be allowed? Would it be wrong for him to look at child pornography? He's never going to be in a position ever again to molest a child. He's going to be locked up for the rest of his life. And would it be wrong for him to look at child pornography? So suppose he smuggled some in or something like this. Never going to hurt anyone again. The pornography is already made. Would it be wrong for him to sit around staring at child porn all day? And the guy whose name was Zach said, no, I couldn't say that was wrong. And so it's just a situation where most people would say, no, child pornography is always wrong. But given his worldview, it just wasn't wrong according to his worldview. And so, I kind of look at what your claims about morality can actually incorporate. And if they make all sorts of things that just have to be wrong, if they make them okay, then you got a problem there.
Yeah. Those are some good observations. I'm seeing some other stuff come in. We got a super chat we're going to go to, but Celtic Muslims, saying, have we heard about Bart Ehrman? And I definitely want to say we would be familiar with Ehrman's work. And it's interesting, isn't it, how, we'll find allies with people who we would be completely antithetical against, insofar as we think it can serve our arguments, where Bart Ehrman has been, I think, refuted by some Christian apologists in great ways. I don't know if you want to say something before we go to a super chat that's specific for you.
Oh, yeah, I would say Celtic Muslim. One, are you a Muslim? And two, what do you think we should learn from Bart Ehrman? Because I usually find out Muslims have absolutely no clue what Bart Ehrman teaches, doesn't realize that if Bart Ehrman is right, Islam is false, and don't seem to realize that there's...
That's a good statement, David. If Bart Ehrman is right, Islam is false.
Islam is false. And you see, in Celtic Muslim, let me go ahead and say, look at what okay, here. Yeah, here is certainly someone who has no clue who Bart Ehrman is, because he said he is a great Christian scholar. Bart Ehrman is an agnostic, leaning. Yeah, he's considers himself an agnostic, although leaning towards the atheism part of the spectrum. So I don't know what you think. I don't know what you think we're going to. Well, let me put it this way: if you think he's a Christian and you don't even know that he's an agnostic, then you don't know what you're talking about. All right, so Celtic Muslim, what are we supposed to learn from Bart Ehrman? Tell us right now what we're supposed to learn. So he said, yes, I can, Dr. Bart Ehrman. Let's go ahead and see.
Yeah, and as that's coming in, Bart Ehrman certainly, if Bart Ehrman doesn't agree with Christianity, it doesn't mean that he agrees with Islam.
No. If you take what Bart Ehrman says seriously, Islam has to be false. So Ehrman says that Jesus' death by crucifixion is one of the best established facts of ancient history. So guess what? According to Islam, Jesus never died, wasn't crucified. So if Bart Ehrman is right, and he's saying that's one of the best established facts, he would have to be right about something like that if we're supposed to trust him on anything. And so it would, yeah, you got a problem. Bart, what has he ever said Islam is wrong? Celtic Muslim, do you agree with Bart Ehrman that Jesus' death by crucifixion is one of the best established facts of history? Do you agree with that? Now, by the way, here's the problem I have, Bobby. Celtic Muslim says right here, Bart Ehrman is the best to learn about Christianity. Now, notice what he's saying.
Yeah.
A person like Bart Ehrman, who is an agnostic leaning towards atheism, who doesn't believe in miracles, who doesn't believe Jesus performed miracles, who doesn't believe Jesus was born of a virgin, who doesn't believe any of those things, that's where you should learn about Christianity from. Well, notice, if we're going to learn about Christianity from Bart Ehrman, then we have to reject Jesus' miracles. We have to reject Jesus' virgin birth. We have to believe that Jesus was crucified, but certainly nothing miraculous. Well, what does Islam teach? Jesus is born of a virgin. Jesus, he performed all these miracles, and he didn't die on the cross. So wait, if we're taking Bart Ehrman seriously, we obviously have to reject Islam. Now, what did he say? No,
reject Islam as well, based on the logic you're using.
Yeah, notice, hey, go to this guy who doesn't believe in God, and he's the one who'll give you the truth about Jesus. Now, notice, first, the hypocrisy. Would Celtic Muslim ever say the best person to learn about Islam from would be an atheist? No, would never say that in a million years. He would say, whatever you do, don't go to an atheist. Don't ever go to an atheist. They're going to be biased. But what do? We go to Bart Ehrman to learn about Christianity. So that's one thing. And then it's just, notice what he said. Well, did he ever say that Islam is false? No, but I mean, if you look at his claims, if he says Jesus certainly died by crucifixion, then that would make Islam false. That would mean the revelation in the Quran is false. If Bart Ehrman says Jesus never performed miracles, then that makes Islam false. If Bart Ehrman says Jesus was never born of a virgin, that makes Islam false. So you have all of these kinds of problems. But apart from that, Ehrman did say why he doesn't talk about Islam. You can go on, this is on my channel. Nabil actually put this video clip together. Bart Ehrman was asked why he doesn't talk about the Quran, write a book about the Quran and the history of the Quran the way he does about the Bible. Bart Ehrman's response was, yeah, if I ever stop valuing my life, I'll do that. So notice what Ehrman's explanation for why he doesn't address Islam the way he addresses Christianity. I'll get killed for doing that in Islam, right? So this is Celtic Muslim here telling us that Bart Ehrman, who says, I don't want to talk about the Quran because I'll get killed, but he doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in miracles, believes Jesus' death by crucifixion, one of the best established facts of ancient history. What is Celtic Muslim really saying here? He's telling us, go to Bart Ehrman to learn anything that Muslims happen to agree with and go with that. But anything that contradicts Islam, which is pretty much everything Bart Ehrman says about Christianity, just reject all of that and ignore all of that. And that's so silly. But tell us, Celtic Muslim, what does Bart Ehrman say that would actually support Islam? Go ahead and tell us. Well, wait, Celtic Muslim, what does Bart Ehrman say that actually supports your religion? We could talk about something else while he tries to think of something.
He did
The answer. What's that?
He brought something up. Tell your watchers about the Gospels, which were kept out of the New Testament. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, you Celtic Muslim. You have never studied anything by Bart Ehrman. That is obvious. That is obvious. When we're talking about these other Gospels, ask Bart Ehrman when these other Gospels were written.
Yeah, second, third.
Yeah. So notice here you have if other Gospels were supposed to be in there, once again, you have a problem. You have a problem in Islam, because the Christian canon was firmly established long before the time of Muhammad. But in the Quran, you have Allah saying that Christians and Jews were still reading the Torah and the Gospel. So are you saying what I can't even figure out what you're saying that Ehrman would actually agree with? Celtic Muslim, which gospel are you saying should have been kept out of the New Testament? So use your vast knowledge of Bart Ehrman here. What gospel should have been included in the New Testament? Because we're not aware of any that actually go back to the first century. Therefore, we're not aware of any that could actually be the authoritative gospels according to Islam. Everyone keep in mind, if you're new to this, according to Islam, Allah revealed the gospel, and Christians had the gospel from the first century all the way down to the time of Muhammad, and Christians were still reading the gospel. So what gospel did Christians have from the first century to the 7th century? Celtic Muslim, tell us what it is. Celtic Muslim, you're saying tell us about the other gospels. I'm asking you what you're talking about. You have other things that were called gospels, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, and so on. These books start in the 2nd century, so they can't be authentic if they were written in the 2nd century and don't go back to the eyewitnesses. So you tell me what gospel should have been included in the New Testament, which goes back to the 1st century. Tell us, what's it called? Celtic Muslim says, see how David is flapping. Bobby, am I wrong here? Am I asking is this a simple request?
Yeah.
If someone is claiming that I should talk about other gospels which should have been included in the New Testament, then I don't know what I'm talking. Then I don't know what he's talking about, right? Because if you're saying there are other gospels, yes, there are other gospels, but they're from the 2nd century on, right? Yeah. So if he's saying something that should have been in the New Testament, and therefore something that he as a Muslim would regard as authoritative, it has to go back to the 1st century. So I'm asking, very simple request: tell me what gospels that aren't in the Bible actually go back to the 1st century.
Yeah. And I think
Celtic Muslim says this guy is totally spinning plates. Guys, can we all agree that Celtic Muslim has no answer? He cannot name us one gospel that goes back to the 1st century, one gospel that would line up with Islam. He can't name one gospel that should be in the New Testament but actually isn't in the New Testament. Because guess what? If he could, he would just say it right now, right? Wouldn't he just say it? And instead it's, aha, David is spinning plates. David is blah, blah, blah. It's very simple. Gospel of such and such. Very, very simple request. All you have to do is name the gospel. 1st century gospel. What is it? All right.
Yeah, I think, hey, I would want to say to Celtic Muslim, we're thankful that you're on the chat with us here. We would want to encourage you to, to look at some of the debates. I see some of them they're posting up with James White. You can go watch some of the debates between Michael Licona and Bart Ehrman as well. I think that there's lots out there for you to go and look, and that might be a good place to start. But, we welcome you here. We're glad. I think David has posed a question. We're going to go to the super chat. And if that question, you want to answer that, or go online and look it up real quick, and whatever it is that you think you're thinking about, you can post it and we'll come back to you. But by the way, David, for the audience, what's our deadline here? We got a super chat we want to address, and how you doing on time?
I think I'm okay.
Okay. Let's. You see the super chat?
No, not anymore.
Not anymore? Okay. Let's see here. I don't know if it went away. If the super chat is still there and you want your question answered, let us see that again.
Hey, check out Celtic. I'm still looking, just waiting for Celtic Muslim to come up with anything. So his response after all that we went through was, please watch Bart Ehrman and learn for yourselves. Yes, everyone, you'll learn that God doesn't exist because there's so much evil in the world. That's Bart Ehrman's reason for not believing in God. He said it in his book on the problem of evil, that because of all the suffering in the world, he concluded that there is no God. So Celtic Muslim wants us to go and learn that there is no God. Again, that Jesus was never born of a virgin because there aren't miracles. Jesus never performed miracles, and Jesus was certainly crucified. So Celtic Muslim, do you want us to apply all that to Islam? Do you want us to say, okay, let's go read the Quran. There is no God. Everything the Quran says about Jesus is wrong. And then tell us about some gospel. Ehrman doesn't claim that there are these other first century gospels that you can't name. He's talking about later works. He's talking about, my goodness, guys. Guys, and obviously there are all kinds of other things that we could talk about. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, it's a tendency in Islam, and you guys have undoubtedly seen this, right? When Muslims go to the Bible, what do? They look for anything that can possibly support Islam, and they ignore everything that refutes Islam, right? So they'll look for some claim by Jesus, and you see, Jesus says right here, he's sending the comforter. We can use that because, that's really Muhammad. Muhammad is the comforter, right? They'll ignore everything else in the passage, everything else in the book. So since they've been doing that for 14 centuries now, what do you think happens when they hear, there's this guy named Bart Ehrman, and he's talking about lost books of the Bible and stuff like that. He must agree with Islam, and he must be saying that there was some original gospel that lines up with Islam. It never crosses their minds to actually go out and look at what these texts say. It actually never occurs to them to even read what Bart Ehrman said. If they did and took him seriously, they'd have to reject Islam. And so it's kind of the same method that Muslims have when they read the Bible, namely just pick anything that you think could agree with you, throw everything else out. It's all garbage. That's kind of the same strategy with, if they're looking at, Bible scholars or New Testament scholars, anything anyone says that I think could agree with me, let me take it and then ignore everything else the person says. And so, wait a minute, Bart Ehrman said something about lost books of the Bible. Hey, I believe that as a Muslim. He must be saying the same thing I'm saying. And it's just a very, very, very sad situation. But you just have to keep pointing it out and hope that they eventually catch on.
So I saw that the super chat, we located that again. I have a question for you real quick. Have you done anything, David, on your YouTube as it relates to something like if a Muslim takes Bart Ehrman's works seriously, then
that's a good idea.
Because I think that would be a great video that you're doing right here.
Yeah, and that's and I'll tell you the main problem. When Bart Ehrman talks about like corruption of the New Testament, things like that, he's talking about textual variants, and in in certain cases where people are actually trying to modify the text or something like that. But this same Ehrman will talk about will say that the Bible is by far the best attested book of the ancient world, right? So he will say he said, and there's no disputing about this, that the Bible is the best preserved work of antiquity. He will grant that. Matter of fact, Ehrman was having a debate with Dan Wallace, and I forget exactly what Dan Wallace said, but Dan Wallace got up there and said, basically, which Ehrman am I going to be debating now? Am I going to be debating the Bart Ehrman who says that the Bible is New Testament is one of the best established books of antiquity, and that they have 90% certainty on these passages? Or am I going to be talking about with the more popular Bart Ehrman who makes all these sensational claims and then can sell a lot of books? It was something along those lines. But here's the issue. Muslims, like Celtic Muslim, will hear Bart Ehrman talk about textual variants and stuff, and he'll be saying, aha, Bart Ehrman must be saying what Islam teaches, that the Bible's been corrupted. Well, one, the Quran doesn't say the Bible's been corrupted. The Quran never says that. The Quran never says one critical word of the gospel. In fact, just the opposite. According to Allah, in the 7th century, read it, Celtic Muslim, Surah 7, verse 157, Allah says that Christians and Jews were still reading the gospel and the Torah during the time of Muhammad. That means it had been preserved from the 1st century down to the 7th century. we know what Christian books were preserved from the 1st century to the 7th century. They're in the New Testament, right? Show me another book that was preserved from the 1st century to the 7th century that would actually fit with what you believe. You can't, because it doesn't exist. So Allah says Christians still had it. 2, Allah commands Christians to judge by the gospel. That's Surah 5, verse 47. Allah says, let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed therein. If any fail to judge by the light of what Allah has revealed, they're no better than those who rebel. So the Quran calls us rebels if we judge by something other than the gospel, which was handed down from the 1st century to the 7th century. Celtic Muslim, if you think it's talking about some other gospel, well, you better be able to tell us which one, because Allah says we're doomed if we don't judge by it. In fact, Surah 5, verse 68 of your Quran, Allah says that Christians and Jews have no ground to stand upon if we do not stand upon the Torah, the gospel, and all the revelation that has come to us. So if Allah in the 7th century is still affirming the gospel that Christians are reading, and you're saying, no, there's some other gospel that wasn't included in there, well, we know what the gospel that Christians had in the 7th century said. We know it. We have copies before that. We have copies before that time, during that time, after that time. So if he's talking about something else, you're basically telling us that Allah is the worst communicator in all of history. If he's telling Christians, the gospel that you've had from the 1st century to the 7th century, that's the one I want you to read, and you have to judge by that. And he actually means some other book that Christians didn't have and it was left out and things like that. You're telling us that Allah is the worst communicator ever. Apart from all that, if you agree with Ehrman that, the textual variants in the Bible actually pose a problem, you've got another problem, because Allah also says, Surah 18, verse 27, Surah 6, verse 115, that no one can change his words. And if you know anything about Islam, that the gospel is supposedly the word of Allah, right? That's Surah 3, verses 3 to 4. Allah inspired the Torah and the gospel. So if the gospel are the words of Allah, and no one can change the words of Allah, and you say that the gospel's been changed, you're telling us that Allah is a liar. So not only are you calling Allah the worst communicator in all of history, you're calling him a liar. And guess what? If we agree with anything Bart Ehrman says about the non-existence of God, about the crucifixion of Jesus, about, no miracles, things like that, if we agree with anything that Bart Ehrman says, even if we agree with what Ehrman says about the reliability of the New Testament, right? Bart Ehrman treats the Bible as extremely reliable. It's our main source of knowledge about Jesus. You think that he's saying something that agrees with you. Everything he says completely flies in the face of your religion. Why do you go to it? Because you've been trained by your leaders all your life to pick and choose whatever you think agrees with you without ever actually bothering to study. I hope that this brief education will encourage you to actually go to Ehrman. And if you are telling people, go learn from Bart Ehrman, I look forward to hearing you next year come back and tell us that you have rejected Islam and that you are now an agnostic, and then we'll have to convince you that God exists and we can go ahead and start over.
Well, David, I think we're going to go to the super chat right now, but I would say this. I think that Celtic Muslim probably gave you a great video idea. You can cut and paste a lot of his statements right out, and you can lay all this out to show some of the idiosyncrasies of this. And so he could really have done us a good service.
Yeah. And Bobby, what's funny is it could either be like one video, like point to all the things Ehrman says that would completely destroy Islam if they were true. Or two, it could be an entire series, right? So you could just post one thing, like just a quote from Bart Ehrman saying that Jesus' death by crucifixion is one of the best established facts of history. And well, guess what? That means he's saying that the Quran is wrong, or him saying that the Bible is the best preserved book of antiquity. That would make Islam wrong. If he says that there are textual variants and he views this as corruption, well, the Quran says that no one can change Allah's word. So no matter what position you take on Ehrman, he's refuting Islam. So that could either be one video, or it could be series of videos, massive series of videos of all these things that are refuting
Muhammad.
Ehrman destroys Islam.
Yeah, because that I think you've got to. So here's the super chat, and thank you so much for the super chat. David, what is the dominant Islamic view about the age of the earth?
Yeah, I don't know. It's similar to Christianity in the sense that they have the various views, right? So you'd have you'd have the young Earth creationists who believe the world is a certain number of thousands of years old, and you could use the Muslim sources to kind of trace back how long ago that would be, and you have Muslim apologists who will defend that position. But you also have, old earthers and theistic evolutionists and everything. So I think they'd have the similar patterns that you find among Christians. As far as a dominant position, I don't know. I've never actually seen anything where they actually counted up Muslims.
Yeah, there is something, Mr. P. Celtic Muslim is in the boom boom room. I think Al-Ghazali was influential with William Lane Craig as it relates to the cosmological argument, which he termed Kalam cosmological argument. There are some areas of alignment. So we're talking about some areas of disagreement with Celtic Muslim. There are some areas of alignment that is, regardless of the age of the universe, that we believe that God created the universe. That everything that begins to exist has a cause, premise one. The universe began to exist, premise two. Therefore, the universe began to exist, conclusion. That's William Lane Craig formulation. And Al-Ghazali, who we went back and he studied, was a medieval Muslim philosopher who would argue this way. The Muslims were heavily influenced by Aristotle, as they were able to have some of the writings that was preserved. Thomas Aquinas was able to help bring back to light some of this and using it in some of his arguments for the existence of God in a Summa Theologica. So I would say with Muslims, I would agree with you. I think that you could have people that could be young Earth or older. They could be kind of in the same dilemmas with us, but at the end of the day, we're all going to believe that that God created the universe. Unlike Aristotle, steady state theory, we don't believe that the universe eternally existed. Second law of thermodynamics, expansion of the universe, these types of things would help us to see that the universe is running down, that it had a beginning point, that there was an initial singularity. Do we have any other questions that you're seeing there, bro, that you want to talk about? Anything else you want to say, David?
No, I haven't seen anything new from Celtic Muslim. I just look back. He's so very Christian of you to dodge and divert. Did we not exhaust the topic? Celtic Muslim is saying, take what Bart Ehrman says seriously. Okay. If we take what Bart Ehrman says seriously, we have to reject Islam and call Muhammad a false prophet and call the Quran a false revelation and say that there is no God. Do you want us to do that, Celtic Muslim?
David, he asked this.
We're running from the topic.
He asked this of you. He says, talk about the corruptions, contradictions, and failed historic events. Maybe we should ask which corruptions, which contradictions, which historic event does he want you to address?
Yeah, but I'll say this. If there's any of that, then Islam is false, right? Again, Celtic Muslim. Allah affirms the inspiration and the preservation and the authority of the gospel, the one that existed from the 1st century down to the 7th century, aka the one that Christians still use right now from the 2nd century on. So you had the 4 gospels in the 1st century. Beginning in the 2nd century, the 4 gospels were treated as a unit called the fourfold gospel or just the gospel. So if you're talking about the gospel, that can refer to a message or it can refer to a book. If you're talking about a book, then from the 2nd century on, if you just said the gospel, that would refer to the fourfold gospel, the 4 gospels, right? So from the 1st century, you have the 4 gospels. Those are the ones we have. From the 2nd century on, they were treated as a unit. They're treated as a unit. So if we're looking at what gospel as a text was preserved down to the 7th century, if you walked up to a Christian in the 7th century and said, hey, you're reading the gospel, that means the fourfold gospel. That means the gospel in the Bible. If you mean something else, you need to clarify. right? So when Allah keeps telling Christians, yes, Allah revealed your gospel. Yes, you have to judge by the gospel. Yes, you have no ground to stand upon if you do not stand upon that gospel. If you're telling us Allah means something completely different, which we don't have and we've never heard of, then once again, you're telling us Allah is the worst communicator who's ever existed. You're telling us he's a deceiver. You're telling us that he's completely incompetent. And you're telling us, so he would have to be a liar, right? He'd have to be a liar when he says that no one can change his words. You're telling us that his words were changed. He's saying, hey, we have the gospel, which we don't have, according to you. We don't have it anymore. You can't even name what it is. So we would have to be wrong. And so basically, you're telling us not only to go with Bart Ehrman, you're telling us to believe in Bart Ehrman and to reject the existence of God and to regard the God of Islam as completely incompetent, a malicious deceiver, the worst communicator in all of history. We'd have to regard Jesus as some sort of myth because he wasn't born of a virgin. He didn't perform any miracles, and he was crucified by the Romans. So that would completely contradict Islam. And your solution is to just say, what about all the errors in the Bible or the historical thing? If any of that happened, then Islam is false. And here's what I don't understand. All right.
He wants you to talk about the adulterous woman. I think that's a softball he just threw you.
Perfect example. So if you're talking about the woman caught in adultery of John chapter 8, we know exactly what the status is. Yeah, you don't have it in the earliest Christian manuscripts. We kind of have an idea of what this story was because keep in mind, no one claims that the only things Jesus ever did are included in the 4 Gospels, right? So there's a popular story about Jesus that's this story, and you had books like the Gospel of John written, and that story wasn't included. So some people said, hey, we should include that story. Guess what? You know how we know all of this? We have this thing called textual criticism, right? We can look at manuscripts and try to figure out why we have certain differences in the manuscripts. You also have differences in your manuscripts of the Quran. Now,
yes, that's key point, David.
Yeah, we have. So if you're saying, "Hey, differences are a problem," manuscript differences are a problem. Well, great, then you got a problem in the Quran because you got the same thing. If you're saying, "Oh, this story wasn't in the original Gospel of John," well, guess what? According to Ibn Masud, Muhammad said, if you want to learn the Quran from anyone, learn it from Ibn Masud. Ibn Masud said Surah 1, Surah 113, and Surah 114 are not supposed to be in the Quran. So they're not part of the Quran. So if you're regarding these kinds of things as refuting your religion, then you've got all kinds of problems. But so notice what we have, because we're actually going to get to the point here. So here's what you have. You have manuscripts of the Gospel of John, which do not include this story of the woman caught in adultery. Then you have manuscripts that do include the story. So someone like Celtic Muslim is looking at and saying, aha, you see, this is corruption. That's not the sort of corruption you need, right? You need massive corruption of doctrine, right? You need gospels where Jesus doesn't die by crucifixion. You need gospels where Jesus doesn't rise from the dead. You need gospels where Jesus isn't the Son of God. Those are the kind of gospels you need. And Ehrman himself agrees you do not have those kinds of things, right? So you're pointing to this as a textual variant, right? There's a variation here. But what's the problem? Well, given that you have this story, you regard this as a problem. If you regard it as a problem, then guess what? You have textual variants in Islam. So guess what? That would make Islam false. But apart from that, if you're saying, aha, you have this story, which people like the story, and so they recognize that the story wasn't included in the Gospel of John, and someone said, this story is too good to ignore. We need this in the Gospel of John. You say that's a problem. If you think that is corruption that supports Islam, your Quran says no one can change Allah's words, right? So your Quran says Allah revealed the Torah and the Gospel. That's Surah 3, verses 3 to 4. Your Quran says no one can change Allah's words. Surah 18, verse 27, Surah 6, verse 115. You're telling us, if you're telling us that means we can't trust our gospel that we have, then you're telling us that the Quran is wrong. So let me put this slightly differently. Celtic Muslim. The gospel that Christians had in the 7th century included that story of the woman caught in adultery. The gospel that Christians had in the 7th century, when Allah affirms that the gospel that we're reading is the authoritative word of God, and the gospel that Allah says, if you do not judge by that book, you're rebels against Allah. And the book that Allah points to and says, you have no ground to stand upon. If you do not stand upon that book, you're telling us can't be trusted. Allah says we have no ground to stand upon if we don't judge by it, and that no one can change his words. How many different ways, Celtic Muslim, how many different ways are you calling God a liar? How many different ways are you telling us that Allah is a liar and completely incompetent? How many different ways are you telling us that Muhammad's a false prophet? How many different ways are you telling us that we can never trust this book? This book is filled with lies. This book says no one can change Allah's words. You're saying that Allah's words in the gospel were changed, that they were corrupted, that we can't trust him. This book says Jesus didn't die by crucifixion, but you tell us to learn from Bart Ehrman, who says Jesus certainly died by crucifixion. So over and over and over again, you're saying, everyone, do not believe this book. It is a book of lies. It is pure deception. It cannot be trusted. Celtic Muslim, according to the Quran, you're not a Muslim. According to the Quran, Surah 4, verse 65 of the Quran, if you disagree with anything Muhammad says, then you're not a real Muslim. It says you have no real Islamic faith. Surah 4, verse 65 of the Quran says if you find any resistance in yourself against any of Muhammad's decisions, you're not a real Muslim. How many different ways have we seen you completely rejecting what Muhammad said and what Muhammad revealed that Allah said? So, dude, in your zeal to attack Christianity, be careful that you don't end up being an atheist. But if you do become an atheist, if you do actually follow your advice and you become an atheist or an agnostic, be sure to come back to us when you're an atheist and agnostic and you've rejected Islam. We'll show you that God exists. We'll show you that Jesus died on the cross, as Bart Ehrman agrees. We'll show you that Jesus' followers went out proclaiming that he appeared to them after he rose from the dead, which Bart Ehrman also agrees is a historical fact. You can't accept that in Islam. And we'll see that according to Ehrman, Jesus was certainly regarded as God in one way or another in all four Gospels, and the Son of God. And so we're gonna have to get to the bottom of this. But if, unlike Bart Ehrman, you don't reject the existence of God, because keep in mind, that is at the bottom of Bart Ehrman's rejection of these claims about Jesus. He doesn't believe in God, so he doesn't believe in miracles. He doesn't believe in the virgin birth. He doesn't believe in these things. Once we show you that God exists, then you have no reason to dismiss these things in the way Bart Ehrman is dismissing them, and you can get on board and believe the gospel of Jesus.
All right. So, David, check this out. I got an idea for you.
What's up?
So you see the book right here, Jesus Interrupted by Ehrman.
It's not on there.
Okay. Well, his book, Jesus Interrupted, Revealing the Hidden Contradictions in the Bible. Maybe for one of your videos, you could do Muhammad Interrupted, Revealing the Hidden Contradictions in the Quran, the book that Bart Ehrman would write if he could.
Yeah.
And getting into the stuff. And so that I think that ties in nicely. We did have from our buddy Jay Shy. He got excited with us and gave a super chat. He just said Celtic needs to read Lacona's book. Okay, I'm assuming he's done a couple things.
I would wish that Celtic Muslim would just read Ehrman's book, right? Because he's going to have to realize that Islam is false, and he's going to have to realize. I mean, again, when I build a case for the resurrection of Jesus, I quote people like Ehrman because he agrees with us on so many things. What doesn't he agree with us on? He doesn't believe in God, and that forces him to reject a lot of the things like miracle claims and so on. It's just shocking. It's just shocking how ignorant people can be. Again, they hear, Bart Ehrman talks about this passage, that this, the story of the woman caught in adultery wasn't in the original or something like that. And they'll think, aha, this supports Islam, not realizing that it refutes Islam in every possible way you could refute Islam. And they just don't get it. That's why we have to keep telling them, ladies and gentlemen, I like all these ideas, Bobby, that you're coming up with about videos and stuff like that, because I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it.
Well, I think that those are some educational pieces because they use Muslims a lot. And I think if you'll just jump in and say the things that Bart would say, use Bart's same tactics, like what are the things he's showing that proves Christianity's false, and show that he would do the same thing and you could use the same measures using that. I think that there could be, I think there could be a book, there could be all kinds of stuff. Hey, Pavlos says, can you explain to me why Christianity among the popular religions is the only female-dominated faith? I just would jump in and say, I don't think that Christianity is a female-dominated faith, but I think it's a female-valued faith. And we see in Galatians 3, obviously it's speaking in the context of salvation, neither slave nor free, male nor female. But we see that Jesus valued females, right? Females were the first to see his resurrection. Jesus had traveling females with him. And so there was a value for women. The Jews said it took 2 prayers to count, it took 2 votes to count for the vote of a male, 2 female votes. The Jews prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not a female. And so you see in the Christian world, there was value on females and as having equal ontological dignity, though different function. So good question right there. Anything else that you're seeing, bro, that you want to jump on before we wrap up tonight?
You can... I'm just looking at once again. It's Celtic Muslim, and no. I don't know how he can make it any clearer that he's never read anything by Ehrman. But he says lies. Bart Ehrman admits about the crucifixion. However, the rest he doesn't. So, what things did I say? I mentioned the virgin birth. Bart Ehrman doesn't affirm the virgin birth. Nope. Celtic Muslim is saying I'm lying about that, apparently, because. So Bart Ehrman does believe in the virgin birth, Celtic Muslim. I said that Ehrman doesn't believe that Jesus performed miracles because he doesn't believe in God. You're saying I'm lying. So you're saying all lies. You're saying Ehrman, what else did I say about Ehrman? I said Ehrman, in his book on how Jesus became God, he concludes that Jesus is affirmed as God in one way or another in all four gospels. He says it's different ways, but it's in all 4 gospels. You say it's lies. You haven't read it. Why would you try to tell me I'm lying? Read the book, right? And in addition to all of this, I said that Ehrman affirms that Jesus followers went out proclaiming that he rose from the dead and appeared to them. He said that's a lie. No, it's not, right? He doesn't believe that Jesus actually appeared to his followers. He believes, because it's an indisputable historical fact, that Jesus' followers went out proclaiming that Jesus had appeared to them and that they sincerely believed it. So everything I said is correct. Everything Celtic Muslim has said is wrong. And somehow this is supposed to, what is this supposed to do, Celtic Muslim? Is this supposed to convince us to accept the Islamic view? I don't know. You're doing a great job. Bang up job. That was sarcasm, by the way. Go ahead.
Well, I tell you, this was a fun night tonight, David. I'd say anybody out there that's on my channel that has been following but came over to hear David for the first time, I'm sure you've heard of him before, but in the event you haven't, please go and subscribe at his channel, Act 17 Apologetics. And if you've come over from David's channel, we'd love to have you at the 1minuteapologist.com. You check out our website there, go to our YouTube, subscribe on our channel. We're going to be doing different interviews. As we mentioned at the beginning, we're getting together with some different YouTubers next week. We're spending a week together. And what we did tonight, David and I, we're going to start doing a lot more of this. We're going to have each other on, and we're just going to be spending time, giving each other opportunities to talk, answering your questions, and taking conferences on the road and stuff. So hopefully we can just tether together and do some great ministry. Mm-hmm. So David, man, it was awesome. And everybody out there, it was awesome to have you guys on the program tonight. Looking forward to seeing you in a couple days in Kiowa, dude.
Yeah. Let me give this last response because it's awesome. No. Celtic Muslim said, "What wrong? I own Ehrman books. However, Bart does not agree with the resurrection." Celtic Muslim, we know he doesn't believe in the resurrection because he doesn't believe in miracles and he doesn't believe in God. Yeah. So that's why he rejects the resurrection. What we said is he agrees that the disciples were convinced that Jesus appeared to them, which is very strange because according to the Quran, they were devout Muslims. According to the Quran, Jesus' followers were Muslims. So why did these guys come to believe, according to Bart Ehrman, your hero, that Jesus had appeared to them? Now, since you were sitting there talking, I went ahead and looked up the quotes. Here they are. Bart Ehrman, quote, that Jesus' followers and later Paul had resurrection experiences is, in my judgment, a fact. What the reality was that gave rise to the experiences, I do not know. So he's saying he doesn't know what caused it, but he admits that they believed it. Paul's tradition that 500 people saw Jesus at the same time has led some people to suggest that Jesus' followers suffered mass hysteria, but mass hysteria does not explain the other traditions. So he's saying, hey, it's popular to respond to the appearances as mass hysteria. He's saying it doesn't account for the evidence. And here we go. Finally, we know that after his death, his followers experienced what they described as the resurrection, the appearance of a living but transformed person who had actually died. They believed this, they lived it, and they died for it. So not only do we have Ehrman affirming Jesus' crucifixion, we have him affirming that Jesus' followers, who according to the Quran were devout Muslims, became convinced that after dying by crucifixion, he had appeared to them. Ehrman doesn't believe he actually appeared. Why? He doesn't believe in miracles. He doesn't believe that dead people actually come back to life. What's your excuse as a Muslim? You believe in God. You believe God raises the dead. According to the Quran, Jesus even raised people from the dead. So Ehrman admits all of the facts. Jesus' death by crucifixion, that's a historical event. That's a historical fact. And Jesus' followers, whom you should trust because they're devout Muslims, went out and went to their bloody deaths proclaiming that Jesus had appeared to them, risen from the dead. Ehrman can't accept what they say because he doesn't believe in a God who performs miracles. You believe in a God who performs miracles. You believe in a God who raises people from the dead. Therefore, you don't have that way out that Ehrman has. And what that means is you can just go where the facts point, the facts that are affirmed by your hero, Bart Ehrman. Jesus died by crucifixion, and his followers, who were devout Muslims, saw him, went to their deaths proclaiming it. Therefore, he rose from the dead. Therefore, Islam is false. Therefore, if you're going to listen to anyone tell you about God, you can't listen to Allah. He's a liar and incompetent, according to you. You can't listen to Muhammad. He's a false prophet who brought a false book, according to you and according to Bart Ehrman. Therefore, if we're going to listen to anyone tell us about God, we should listen to that guy, the one who rose from the dead. And what did he say? Well, that's exactly what we have in the Gospels. So check them out. All right.
So David, somebody wanted to know what shirt size you are. So extra small. They want to send you a T-shirt.
Usually double X.
Not an extra small.
No, double X. I mean, I can fit into an extra small. It's just not going to be something you'd want to see me in.
Yeah. That would be traumatizing. And somebody asked me, Pavlos, about Greg Kokel. I just had him on Pastor's Perspective on the radio. You can go to our YouTube. Or you can go to YouTube and just type in Pastor's Perspective, Greg Kokel, and we had him on. He did a great job. And David Wood, be sure to check out his video. He did a wonderful endorsement on his 10th anniversary tactics. So yes, David and I, we got some great Christian friends that are apologists, and we plan to be bringing them on. And as David says, we want to take the YouTube world by storm. So, hey, David. Dude, it was a great time hanging out tonight, bro. Are you going to surf next week with me in Kiowa, dude? Or
yeah, I'm a big surfer.
You know, all right. I think we'll get you out there on the board.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'll be hey, dude. On the last night, we do a polar plunge in the Atlantic. So I think, are you in for that?
Oh, I'm happy to do a polar plunge. I've done that. I've done that before. Yeah.
So hey. To the audience who's here right now, we're going to be doing some YouTube live stuff next week. So just be paying attention to our channels. We'll keep you in the loop on that, and it'll be a fun week next week with all kinds of content coming your way.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, everybody, hope you have a great night. David, thanks again. See you this weekend, bro.
All right.
All right. Peace out.